season now. Can you speak a little bit about what he has meant to the league, what he means to the league right now, particularly in the midst of a global pandemic, in terms of how he's conducted himself and how he's led the Lakers to their 17th championship? Can you talk about LeBron James from the standpoint of what he means to the league right now?
Sure. I think one of the most important things that people in the league know, but maybe a lot of fans don't, or people outside of the league, that in addition to being arguably the best, or one of the best, of course, players in the league, he's certainly one of the hardest working. And I think that has as much to do with the longevity and success of his career than anything. And I'd say, for example, Stephen A., when I spent several weeks in the bubble, I visited a few times earlier during the restart of the season. Frankly, other than seeing him on the court, you wouldn't have known he was there. I mean, he was so focused on his game, so focused on his body and taking care of himself that that's the commitment and dedication that has enabled him to have a career as long as it's been, and to continue playing at an MVP type level at this age and with all the miles on his body. So that's his on the court activity, and off the court, I think it's incredible what he's continued to do. He led a huge, voter registration and engagement initiative. He's been, very outspoken on things that affect him and his community and his family and our country. So I'd say, I'm incredibly proud of him personally, but I think he's a marvel in so many ways. And again, though, so much of it comes back, whether it's his on the court activities or off the court, are his focus and dedication.
Transitioning from him to Brooklyn, New York. On one hand, you've got KD and Kyrie in Brooklyn, which is a very, very big deal because obviously when you got two of those stars on your squad, you're considered a title contender. On the other hand, you've heard the stories about Kyrie and how he didn't want to speak to the media. You saw a report by ESPN's Tim McMahon where he highlighted some of the things about James Harden and the latitude that was given to him by the Houston Rockets organization. How do stories like that affect you? How do you believe stories like that affect the league in the eyes of the public? What are your thoughts about that?
Look, it's not just the stories, as you know. It's not only about the media. It's about the actuality of what happens at some teams. And I only say I think we all know that it's nothing new in professional sports, or certainly in the NBA, that not everyone's happy. Issues have been compounded by the pandemic. Look, face it, that for the isolation that has come with it for many people, being away from friends and family in the bubble, or even now, lives altered in so many ways. I think it just further accentuates, issues that we all have. And I think those aren't stories, you like to see. But again, even if they weren't reported, there's no question that there are issues that happen at teams. I mean, ideally, from a league standpoint, those issues are handled behind closed doors, and that guys are able to work out issues with their teams. In some cases, guys end up getting traded because that's what the team wants to do rather than that's what the player wants. In other cases, it's just bad chemistry on a team, or change in circumstances, changes in GMs and coaches, and those things work their way out. I would say in the case of both James Harden and Kyrie, you have like extraordinarily talented people, complex people also, who, again, I mean, in many ways, like LeBron, it's not just about life on the court. They're multidimensional people. They feel strongly about lots of issues around their community. And again, at the end of the day, you just want to see them be able to focus and have great seasons. And it seems like in this case, both situations have settled down. I think Kyrie, recognizes at the end of the day that talking to the media is part of his responsibility as a player. And it's not really just about the media, with all due respect. I mean, you all are a proxy, for reaching our fans. And it's part of how our fans can engage with our players in our game, to understand sort of what players are thinking about and what they're doing. And I think James, I saw the media he did last week. He said he's focused on his game and being in Houston right now. And look, he's got some great players around him, and let's see what happens once the season starts. Ultimately, that's what puts a smile on my face. That's what's so exciting, to be back to NBA basketball.
Absolutely. Getting back to NBA basketball, but I'd be remiss in neglecting to bring up Kawhi Leonard as well, because you guys are investigating, the league is investigating allegations made against the Los Angeles Clippers and consultant Jerry West about the recruitment of Kawhi Leonard. What can you tell us about that, and how far along you are in that investigation? What can you speak on in regards to that?
All I can say there is, everyone is entitled to the presumption of innocence. Obviously, someone that is not known to me or to the league office has made an allegation against the team, and so we'll look into it. It's our obligation on behalf of all 30 teams that if something comes to our attention, we look into it and we see if there's anything there. Again, I have inappropriate that took place. But that's why we follow up on whatever leads come to the league office. So that's all I can say right now.
Commissioner Adam Silver, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for making sure that we have another season to look forward to tomorrow night, opening night.
Yo, we at the dawn of a new season. Old faces, new teams with title dreams. Who do you believe in? It's the real race to the throne. Feels like one team is in the race of its own. Shams back in LA. Steph and Dre coming back to the Bay. Kyrie and KD and BK. And y'all say y'all tried and tested. Feeling a bit disrespected. Forget the skeptics. Expect the unexpected. The freak, the Joker, Luke and Enderbeer too. Last year's rookies is here too. Year two, fear who? Locked in, staring it down. It's all said and done. Who gon' be wearing the crown? When I'm balling up the roof, race to the throne, taking it home. Got ankles to break. Who wearing the crown? Ready to ball.
It's what we're all waiting for. Opening night, tomorrow night, NBA season, and it is my honor and privilege to have our next guest, approaching his 7th year as commissioner of the National Basketball Association, the one and only Adam Silver. How are you, sir? Thank you for being on the show.
I'm great. Good morning. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Let's get right to it, because before we get to any on-court stuff, obviously, we've got to get to a lot of things about this global pandemic that's basically taken over this world right now. About 9 months ago, had to postpone the season, March 11th, because of COVID-19. Now you got through the season, started it back up at July 30th, had a phenomenal time in the bubble, not one positive test, but now we come into a new season. Talk to me for a second, Commissioner. And when you talk about players, coaches, league personnel getting vaccinated for COVID-19, can you talk to me about that? How are you guys going to go about doing that?
Sure. Although we're somewhat in the dark, not unlike most people. Yeah. Certainly, there's no way we would ever jump the line in any form whatsoever. And for the most part, because our players are young and healthy without some sort of comorbidity, they will not be a high priority for vaccinations. I mean, there are some other members of the NBA community working, on court, who are older and will have a higher priority to get the vaccine. But as I said, I mean, we will, I think, very likely be part of some public service campaigns. We've already talked to the CDC and other governmental agencies about that, encouraging people to get vaccinated when it is appropriate. But up till then, as I said, we'll just be watching and waiting.
Like you said, when it's appropriate, you'll definitely encourage people to take the vaccine. What if players refuse, sir? How is that going to be handled by the NBA?
First of all, we don't have the right, short of a negotiation with their union, to require them to get vaccines. And I'm hoping it doesn't come to that. I mean, I understand, that some people don't want to get vaccinated. I think part of it will be a public education campaign. I'm also hoping that as more people get vaccinated, it increases the public's confidence in the vaccine and the testing protocols they've undergone thus far, in order for the government to, in essence, verify that it is safe. But again, I think as time goes on, I think more people will recognize the importance of getting vaccinated, and again, not just for themselves. I mean, this is a conversation we've already begun with some members of the NBA community. Again, for young, healthy people, while it's still an incredibly serious disease, they tend to do better than older people or people with underlying conditions. So for our players, ultimately the reason to get vaccinated may not be to protect themselves. It may be to protect their parents, their grandparents, and other members of the community.
When people talk about the NBA as it pertains to COVID-19, you guys are the standard because obviously you were very, very successful in the bubble in terms of, just making sure that there were no positive tests. It was a phenomenal job by the league, the players, everybody involved. But now we're talking about something that's not a bubble. It's 30 different locations. You got 30 teams in the NBA. They're playing. How is the NBA going to be able to enforce protocols in 30 different locations? It was hard enough, I imagine, doing so in a bubble.
It's a fair question, and it's going to be a very different operation being outside of a bubble. I mean, as you know, there were all sorts of issues going into the bubble, and we weren't sure how that would work, and it ended up working in many ways far better than we thought. I mean, now that we're going to be in essence, 30 different markets, or and completely outside of a bubble, there's no doubt we're going to have issues. We've been watching closely what's been happening, not just with other leagues, college sports, et cetera, that are playing outside of bubble. And even, Stephen A., I'd say aside from violations of protocol, we know that even people who are following all of our rules exactly as intended, that when you're living at home, you have children in school, you have family members who are out and about, no one is immune from this virus. I mean, we saw it when our players first came into training camp just a few weeks ago. We had essentially 50 positive cases just to begin training camp. And this is not necessarily because anyone engaged in reckless activity. It's because they're living their lives like most other Americans are. So, I mean, we'll have all kinds of procedures in place to attempt to assure that our protocols are followed. And of course, to the extent they aren't, we'll address it. And I think one of the conversations we've been having with our Players Association is we may have to adjust our protocols as we go, depending on how things are working. But to your point, this is going to be a far different environment than being in a bubble. And there's no doubt, I think, that it's highly likely that there will be cases based on what we're seeing in society around us.
Last question on this particular subject. I know how optimistic that you are, and you don't like to, even though you take all matters into consideration, worst case scenario and beyond, you certainly don't like to think that way. Can you foresee, is there any kind of scenario that you can envision where this season can ultimately end up being postponed again? And if so, specifically, can you speak to what's being done to make sure that's prevented?
Well, first of all, is it possible that the season could get postponed? Of course. I mean, nobody can predict precisely the trajectory of this virus. I mean, it's been terrible, frankly, and hundreds of thousands of lives have been lost just in the United States, and it continues to rage in many ways. And this is something very new that we're doing. Again, watching closely what's happening in the NFL and baseball. And baseball did an incredible job under the circumstances, and so is the NFL now. But those are outdoor sports, they're in stadiums. Just as when we went into the bubble, we couldn't be sure how things would play out. Now that we're trying something new, an indoor sport, again, different protocols that we haven't had in place before. I think we wouldn't be acting responsibly, and I wouldn't be acting responsibly if I said it's just full steam ahead no matter what. Having said that, I mean, based on our experience in the bubble, we have a fair degree of confidence in our approach. But again, we're in constant discussions almost daily with the Players Association, certainly daily with our team of medical experts who will be watching over what we're doing. And it's one thing to get through training camp and even a preseason, but once we go into the regular season, it's an enormous amount of travel. Our teams essentially play every other day. Schedule and some travel changes to help reduce the chances of an incident. And hopefully as the vaccines begin to get, as adoption continues, as tens of millions of doses begin to get distributed, that will have an impact as well. But the answer is we have lots of alternative plans in the drawer, and we'll just see. I think we're going to go forward as we are. We have, as I said, a fair degree of confidence in it, but I want to make sure everyone understands that the safety and health of our players and all the participants are our #1 priority. And if any time we feel that's being jeopardized,